The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcast articles and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. You're listening to a Truly Human Leadership podcast refresher, where we reshare insight from podcast episodes from the past. Barry-Wehmiller CEO Bob Chapman was invited to be a guest on the Great Work podcast, which is an outreach of a company called Box of Crayons, who specialize in helping leaders be better coaches in their workspace. Their why, as we might say, is to help people and organizations do less good work and more great work. At the center of Box of Crayons is a fellow named Michael Bungay Stanier. He's the host of the Great Work podcast, and his first book, per Box of Crayons Why, is called Do More Great Work. Before he embarked on a career to help organizations do great work, he had a number of careers, including one in product development where he had something of a hand in creating stuffed crust pizza, of all things. Michael's most recent book is called The Coaching Habit: Say Less, Ask More, and Change the Way You Lead Forever. Something that really resonated with us here at Barry-Wehmiller. Michael and I recently had a conversation about his book, but more specifically about coaching. And we start out talking about how he defines coaching and why he differentiates it from leading or mentoring.
Daniel Goleman is the guy who made popular the whole idea of emotional intelligence. And some close to 20 years ago, he wrote an article in Harvard Business Review called Leadership That Gets Results. And he said something very interesting. He says there's actually 6 different styles of leadership. And he found that coaching was one of those leadership styles, but it was one of the least utilized of the leadership styles, even though it had a great effect on culture, a great effect on employee engagement, and a strong effect on bottom line results as well. So, I'm certainly separating it out from the coaching as a formal moment where you summon somebody into your office or your cubicle or whatever and go, all right, Brent, it's our monthly coaching session. I'm about to coach you now, which of course just kind of weirds everybody out. It's really saying, look, coaching is about showing up on a day-to-day basis. It's about helping people learn. It's about helping people step towards their full potential. And the foundational behavior at the heart of this is to stay curious a little bit longer and rush to action and advice just a little bit slower. Because when you do that, great questions can generate new insights about yourself, insights about the situation at hand. New insights can generate new action, new behavior change. You do things differently. And when you do things differently, you step into having more impact in the work that you do.
So your new book, The Coaching Habit, is trying to get leaders to integrate this, leaders, to integrate this in their working lives, in their lives with the people that they lead or manage. And it's practical ways to do that. In this, you have 7 questions. So talk about that a little bit and how that relates to this idea of coaching.
Yeah. So for me, when I wrote this book, I'm like, okay, I'm writing this for a normal person, somebody who might not normally read a business book. So
and believe me, there are people in business who are not normal.
There are plenty of those. And so I'm writing it for busy manager, busy leader, busy individual contributor, basically anybody who interacts with human beings and goes, look, I'm committed to my job. I'm committed to the work I'm doing. Is there a way I could do this better for my sake, for everybody's sake? And that's what this is all about. And part of my goal was to write the shortest possible book that would still be useful. So this is a great discipline. It's like, okay, how much can I leave out of this book? What's the minimum I can teach people? And when it came down to it, I said, look, to build a coaching habit, you need to know a couple of things. The first is you need to know how to build habits, because habits are the building blocks of behavior change. If you don't really know the science of habits, you're always going to be up against it a little bit to try and deliberately, mindfully change the way you behave to up your game. So chapter 1, all about the new habit formula and how do you simply decide on this is my new ways of behaving. And then the remaining chapters of this, there's 7 questions, just as you said. And, Brent, I played around with this. It took me, I wrote 4 pretty bad versions of this book before I wrote the good version. At one stage I'm like, here are 167 questions that you can have as a manager. And I was like I literally wrote that book. I wrote 167 questions, like 2 or 3 pages per question. And at the end, I had a very, very bad book. So I'm like, okay, that's unusable. So I went down to 5 questions, up to 9 questions. But I really, in the end, picked these 7 questions. I said, you can use these across a range of different moments. You can use them to start a conversation more quickly, to finish it more powerfully, to focus it, to get to the heart of what's going on, to help people, drive people learning so they actually move to action, they actually take something away. So, it's just my opinion. But in the end, I go, these are the 7 questions that if you've got these in your repertoire, they're the 20% that's going to make 80% of the difference.
And these all, you start everything. You start with the kickstart question. Trying to find out what is on that person's mind. One of the things that I like about when I first saw the book, when we had gotten a copy of it, was the subtitle. Say less, right. Ask more, and change the way you lead forever. Because one of the things we talk about a lot is it's listening, and it seems like these questions are primed to create that kind of environment, that listening environment.
Yeah. And, it's to acknowledge how hard listening is. Because here's what most people have got down. They've got fake listening down. You know what fake listening is? It's like you tip your head to the side. You get that kind of curious yet sympathetic yet quizzical look on your face. You wrinkle your nose and your forehead a little bit. You nod your head as they're talking. You make those small kind of grunting noises. Right. But in your head, what often is going on is one of 2 things. Either you're thinking, God, when will they stop talking so I can just tell them what to do? You're just waiting for that moment where they take a breath and you can interrupt. Or you're thinking about something completely different. You're like, did I take the chicken out of the freezer before I left to work this morning? What am I going to cook for dinner? So it's like, the thing is, we've all had that experience where you feel somebody is genuinely giving you their full attention. And it's so powerful, not just for the sake of being heard, but kind of paradoxically, perhaps, it's actually you're being seen, right? You get the sense that people are truly seeing the person you are in front of them and giving you their full attention. It's so powerful.
Yeah. And you feel like you matter, which is, to plug another book. But anyways, that's what it is. That's what it is.
I've read that book. Yeah, exactly.
That's what it is the act of listening. It can be such a powerful thing because it validates a person. They can see that they're valued, and you're right. It happens so infrequently.
And the connection there is to asking the question, because the act of asking a question is also a statement of you matter, because what you're saying to them is, I believe that you have the answers to this. I believe that you have the autonomy and the mastery and the experience to get, if not the whole way down the road, part of the way down the road. So I see that in you and I trust you. And, asking a question is hard because it is a giving up of power. If you're telling somebody what to do, you're in control. You have power. You're the smart one. You have the authority. You have the status. You have control. But if you ask a question, you're suddenly giving up status, you're giving up control, you're handing that over to the other person. So it's a far less comfortable experience to be curious, but it has greater impact in terms of that sense of engagement and, to coin a phrase, that everybody matters.
So let's go. I think you said something really important just then, that asking a question is a giving up of power. I think that's a pretty powerful statement. Mm-hmm. So do you think that's why this type of coaching might be difficult for many quote-unquote managers, because it's really hard to give up that power?
I think that's part of the mix. I think there's a more front and center reason, which is most of us have been trained for years that your job is to have the answer, that this is the way you provide value. This is how you prove that you're worth it, this is how you prove that you've kind of got the level, the position, the status that you have. That starts at school. right? And it goes on, and throughout her whole career, it's like, make sure you've got the right answer for this. So there's just that, which is like, we've been trained pretty thoroughly to go, your job is to have the answer. But I think that this piece around a control lies at a kind of deeper level around that. It's a more subtle way that we resist staying curious. So I certainly think it's part of the mix.
You said that you wrote many different versions of the book, and right. It could have been 140 questions.
Yeah.
How did you whittle the 140 down to the 7?
Well, it's partly experience. Like, Box of Crayons has been talking about and training questions for 10 years. I've been a trained executive coach for closing in on 20 years. And I remember doing my training, all those years ago. And more interesting to me than the models that were being shared is I'd watch the master trainers, the master coaches, and I would write down their questions. Because it would just occur to me that the question made all the difference. Get the question right, and the conversation goes somewhere powerful. Get it wrong, and it kind of stalls a little bit. So I've just been hoarding questions for years. It's like a new TV show, The Question Hoarder. I'm just and then there's this quote from Einstein: "Things should be as simple as possible, but no simpler." So it's easy to just write a book for 176 questions in them. It's just not very useful. It's much more powerful to say, okay, I'm down to 9 questions. Can I take one of these away? It's like playing Jenga. It's like, how do you keep removing blocks until you have something that's the most elegant solution? And in part, that's part of the way we show up in the world. It's Box of Crayons. We have 5 core values. One of them is provoke impact, and that's part of what this book's about, and the video support is to change people's behavior. But one of them is to pursue elegance. So it's like, how do we make this as elegant as possible? And that's part of the aesthetic and the design and the limited number of questions in the book.
I don't want to give away any spoilers here. We want people to read the book, but I do want to get into some of the individual questions. And
yeah.
The first question is the kickstart question. What's on your mind? And in the book, you say that often it's hard for managers to coach because they just don't know where to start.
Right. I always think of it because I was a very unsuccessful dater as a teenager. I was like trying to talk to women. I'm like, I always thought if I got into it, I'd be awesome. It's like, how do you get into it? Like, how do you start that conversation?
I'm going to tell you what, if you were able to tell them that you helped invent the stuffed crust pizza, that is
exactly
an opening line if I've ever heard one.
Where was that when I needed it as a 21-year-old? But, yeah, so it's like, so our belief is that if you can't coach in 10 minutes or less, you don't have time for the coaching. So it means you have to get into the real stuff fast. You don't have time for a whole lot of small talk. There's a place for small talk for sure. Just you can't have every conversation be a kind of meander. You've got to get into it. But you've got to get into it in a way that's not you just telling them what to do. It's actually a conversation that's directed with curiosity, but is still focused. And that's why the kickstart question works so well. The question again, what's on your mind? And what that does is does 2 things. The first is it gives them the control we were talking about earlier on. It says to them, you get to choose what we're talking about here. Now, you could frame it a little bit if you want. It's like, okay, so you're dealing with the blah, blah project. And I know that we've got an end date delivery on that by the end of the month. So I'm curious in terms of just how things are going there. What's on your mind? So you can shape context, but you're actually saying to them, you get to tell me what you're excited about, what you're worried about, what you're consumed about, what's kind of waking you up at 4 o'clock in the morning. But you're saying to them, don't just report out. Don't give me this kind of boring data. Let's go to the juicy part here. Let's get into the thing that really matters for you. I mean, I always think, I know that you guys have many kind of subcultures within Barry-Wehmiller and from the different organizations that have come on board and become part of the bigger organization. So there's probably different ways of doing this, but in most organizations I've seen, an example that is something that is kind of universally underwhelming is the one-to-one weekly meeting or maybe monthly meeting. So I come into my office, we're doing our monthly checkup or our weekly checkup. And the junior person kind of talks about all the things they're doing. The senior person nods and kind of looks interested. And honestly, both sides are a little bit bored by this because it's like, why are we actually even doing this? And we're ticking a box perhaps. And I just think that a conversation could be completely reinvented where you're like, okay, I know you're doing a ton of stuff. Out of all the stuff you're doing at the moment, what's on your mind? See, now we're into it. Again, we're into it fast, and we're into a great conversation. So I think that can be a great way of accelerating into a juicier topic.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned the one-on-one meeting because, you know, as I was looking through the materials and prep for the interview, the 10-minute aspect of it kept kind of being fascinating to me. And there's one part of me that thinks if you're a leader or a manager and you don't have 10 minutes to spend with a person, or you don't have 10 minutes to coach, should you really even be a leader?
Right. I mean, it's fair enough because we have a real tension, right, which is helping people figure out what their job is as a manager and a leader. Is it to get stuff done, or is it to support your people to get stuff done? And of course, the answer is both of those. But what tends to happen is that getting stuff done tends to trump everything. And what that does is it just suckers you all into overworking and doing too much work.
Well, and, you know, then the other end, thinking about it, the other thing that I thought of as well is, you know, we talk a lot about how traditional managers aren't leaders. And there's traditional mindsets that people, through no fault of their own, have just kind of landed into. And a lot of our business models encourage that. So when I think about this book, you know, starting with 10 minutes, sometimes it's about incremental change. It's about incremental change and getting somebody to think a different way about their leadership and start changing from there, which, you know, sometimes is the way you have to do it. It's just not going to be, if you're in a role that you're not prepared for, it's not going to change overnight. And I think that's where you're getting the habit forming portion of it, where you guys are going with that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, the saying, how you spend your minutes is how you spend your life. So you can go, it's like for me, it's not, I mean, it is incremental change, but you're like, okay, if you make this your kind of daily habit of asking questions and staying curious, before you know it, you've lived a life of curiosity. You've lived a life of empowering people. You've lived a life of trusting people and enabling them to be cared for, to flourish, to do the best they can in the work that they do and beyond work as well. So, you know, it's on the one hand, it's very tactical to say, you know, build a coaching habit. Here's a formula. Here's 7 questions. Here's a person. Here's a moment. Build a habit around that. On the other hand, hopefully it's having one of those ripple effects that changes the way people live.
And people learn differently. I mean, you know, it's amazing the processes that I have to put in place. I'm not a very process-oriented person, but it's amazing the processes that I need to put into place in my life to be able to be more effective. You know,
right?
We're all like that. We all learn differently, and we all have to have some kind of indicators to get us where we're going, in a sense. And I think that's what, you know, a lot of us like-minded people who are trying to change the conversation about business, leadership, management, whatever you call it, you have to have a starting place. And just this 10 minutes could be the thing that changes an entire organization, because like you said, you know, it could just build up and build up and build up, and before you know it, you've got a whole team of empowered people that just start from a question of what's on your mind.
You know, one of the cool things that happened to me recently, I was at a conference and a guy came up. He's a head of HR for a well-known brand here in Canada. It's a well-known brand globally, but there's the Canadian operations. And he was talking about something that we teach in our programs because their organization had brought us in. And it's something called the drama triangle. And it basically says, look, when things get dysfunctional, these three different roles play out. There's the victim, there's the persecutor, and there's the rescuer. And it's a very powerful little way of seeing the world, because you start seeing how the little dysfunctions of your relationships kind of change into your behavior and in the end up serving nobody. And he was saying, look, I love your programs. I'm more coach-like at work. But what's been really cool is we've used the drama triangle, my 9-year-old son and I, to kind of reinvent the way we work together. Because I suddenly saw the patterns that we kept acting out. You know, whenever things got hard, he'd play victim, you know, kind of whiny. It's so hard. It's not fair. And whenever that happened, this man who's a very nice guy just said, and I just turned into this persecutor. I'm not really a persecutor, but I am with my son apparently. Kind of like, you know, finger waggling. What are you doing? Stop complaining. Stop whining. Buck up. Get across, or whatever it might be. So, you know, really, I think the way these, I mean, I wrote this thinking, okay, it's a business book. It's for busy managers, busy leaders, individual contributors. But part of what's been great is getting the feedback about it actually just shows up. If you interact with human beings, whatever the context, there's stuff here that could be useful for you.
One of the concepts that you introduce in the book that you return to from time to time is the advice monster. Talk a little bit about the advice monster. Kind of delve into that a little bit for us.
Yeah. So the three core principles behind how we teach coaching are be lazy, be curious, be often. Now, be lazy is deliberately provocative because, you know, most people, you know, the people who listen to podcasts like this are not the people who are lazing off, goofing off, not working hard. They're kind of engaged, committed, up for it. But the insight, and we've kind of talked about this already, is, you know, you can overwork in a way that actually is disempowering for those that you lead and exhausting for you. You end up, you know, overwhelmed yourself or the bottleneck to your team. So it's all about saying slow down your rush into jump in, fix things, solve things, help people out. It's not saying never be helpful. It's just saying don't do it quite as quickly and as automatically as you're currently doing. Being curious is about giving less advice, and I'm going to come back to that in a second, just to say that be often is about what we've already also talked about, which is to say that this isn't about making coaching an occasional one-off intervention. It's about recognizing that every interaction can be a bit more coach-like and helping people see that. But being curious, here's the bottom line. We are all advice-giving maniacs. You know, we're like, we don't even know what the problem is, but our years of practice have triggered us so that, you know, within 20 seconds of somebody to talk about something, even though you don't know the context, you don't know the individuals, you don't know really what's going on, within 20 seconds you're like, I already know what you should do. I'm either going to tell you, I'm going to interrupt you and tell you, or I'm just going to wait a bit and then tell you. And that's what I just wanted people to recognize, is how quickly the advice monster comes out of the dark and starts waving its hand in the air and go, oh, I'm going to add value here. I'm going to tell you what to do. And again, you know, coming back to that Daniel Goleman piece, which is there are 6 different styles of leadership. One of those styles of leadership is about being very clear and telling people what to do, and it's entirely appropriate. When the building is burning down, it's not the time to ask people how they feel about all that smoke in the air. It's about, let me tell you what to do. Let's leave the building. But our leadership skill about providing answers, that's well developed for most people. That's an overdeveloped muscle. What's undeveloped is this piece around curiosity, and that's what we're kind of banging the drum for.
You know, when I think, and maybe this is just me, it may not be other people, but when I think about the advice monster, I think often about conversations I've had with my parents. Because God loved them, all they want to do is help. All they want to do is help. All they want to do is you know, provide some kind of assistance, which may be wisdom or money or whatever they need to do to help. And it's oftentimes where I have a conversation with my parents and the response is immediately, well, this is what you should do.
Right.
When really what I want them to do is I just want them to listen to me for a little while and understand where I'm coming from. And I don't think we think about that in our I mean, it's easy to think about that when it's your parents because you obviously
They're designed to wind you up. That's the role of parents and siblings.
Exactly.
Press all your buttons like that.
Right. And you expect to have conversations like that with them, but we don't understand how easy it is to slip in that mode with other people, and it may come from the best place. It may come from the place of just wanting to help that person, but not realizing what you're doing is not listening to them, in a sense.
Right. No, exactly right. I mean, I think what's important there is the both things you're talking about, which is, for the most part, this behavior comes from a place of, I'm just trying to help. I'm on your side. This is what I think is the most useful thing. What people don't realize is that's not the most useful thing. Sometimes it is. When you come into my office and go, Michael, where's the folder? Don't ask me a question about how I feel about folders. Tell me where the folder is. But sometimes I'm like, just hear me out. Just ask me a question. If instead of telling you what to do when you're talking with your parents, I go, God, I totally get it, Brent. What do you think the real challenge is here for you? Mm-hmm. Like, now it's like, God, that's now you're taking me further into exploring what this challenge is, and it's that much more powerful. Mm-hmm. And ironically, they get to work less hard. I mean, that's that whole be lazy piece. It's like, you don't have to work hard coming up with ideas and solutions. That's not what they even want. Just have a few good questions.
Yeah. And, and it goes back to something you said earlier as well, as the giving up of power. Because partially having power in a sense is being able to fix something.
Right.
We call it playing God all the time. We want to have that ability to put that mountaintop back on, heal the sick, whatever. Just in the small interaction that we have with another person. And, you're not God and you can't fix everything. You do have to give up that power in conversation. Right. And there again, that may be what was needed in the first place. It's not about you, it's about them.
So what I'm hearing from all of this, Brent, is that you're buying copies of my new book for your parents. I love that. It's a very generous gift, and I fully support that. It's a good idea.
I mean, they'd be more apt to take the film version, but we can do that. We'll wait till the feature film rights get bought.
Right, perfect. Yeah, I see a young Brad Pitt playing my role. Yeah. I think that's going to work just fine.
What do you think the most difficult thing is in establishing a coaching habit? What's the biggest roadblock to someone establishing that in their leadership life?
That's a really big question, and I think we've talked a little bit about some of it, which is just that conversation about the power of old habits, and then more subtly the nuance about what it means to, in asking a question, what that means about status and giving up power, and how that plays into kind of what servant leadership is. It is just difficult to change old habits. That's the hard thing. It is difficult to change old habits. So part of what I'm going to recommend, I mean, it's ironic, of course, it's like, don't give advice. Oh, but follow my advice in telling you that.
That's what podcasts are for. I mean,
Right, exactly. But you're not trying to boil the ocean here. Don't go, Brent and Michael, so inspiring, so awesome, this book, so amazing, I'm just going to change it all. I'm going to become the coaching guy or the coaching woman here. I mean, that typically won't work. It's like, start somewhere, pick a habit, pick a question, pick a person, pick a moment, and try one coaching habit. Because with all difficult things, we actually have a kind of deep commitment to the way things are right now, the status quo. And that the kind of the roots of that commitment actually run deeper than we might think, and are harder to shift than we would like. So it's about actually being willing to be a beginner and start small and start somewhere and see how that goes and build up this muscle, because it's, most of us are 90-pound weaklings when it comes to being curious. Yeah. So It's like you don't want to go into the gym and start attempting to bench press 450 pounds. You go in and you kind of get on an exercise bike and you maybe hoist a 10-pound dumbbell a bit. I want people to think similarly around this, which is think of it a way of, over a period of time, transforming the way you show up in the world. Just like you do in a gym. It's like start small, be rigorous, keep showing up, keep trying it out, press through to failure, learn from that, try again. And that's what's going to build up this coaching habit.
Don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller. And you can find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.